A wolf appeared in a slave yard, and they sold me to make it disappear. They kept sale records, prices, dates, reasons for transfer. Mine says, sold for disciplinary reasons, encouraging superstitious talk among other slaves. That's their language for what I'm about to tell you. I was being humiliated in front of witnesses when the dogs started barking at the tree line. Not normal barking, panic barking. The overseer told them to quiet down. They wouldn't. Then something stepped out of the woods. A wolf, too large, too still. Eyes that looked at me like it knew my name. The overseer raised his gun. His hand shook so hard he couldn't aim. The wolf didn't attack. It just stood there, owning the space, drawing a line in the dirt that said, "Your authority ends here." 3 weeks later, a buyer came. The overseer told him I was trouble, sold me cheap, got me off his land before anyone could ask why a grown man was afraid of an animal. But here's what they never wrote down. The wolf appeared 3 more times over the next 15 years. Always when I was alone, always watching, never attacking. They could sell my body, they could erase my wife, they could rewrite the story into just a stray dog, but they couldn't make me forget what I saw. So I'm asking you now, if the system has to erase something to survive, doesn't that prove the thing was real? And if a man carries a forbidden truth for 60 years, who decides whether he's a witness or a fool? The overseer found me by the hog pens that morning. I was mucking out the trough, my hands deep in slop and mud when I heard his boots on the planks behind me. I did not turn around. Turning meant acknowledgement. Acknowledgement invited conversation. Conversation with overseers never ended well. He said my name. I straightened slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground. This is the first rule. Never meet their gaze unless ordered. Eyes up without permission is challenge. Challenge is punishment. He asked if I thought I was too good for this work. I said no, sir. He said I looked like I thought I was too good. He said the way I held myself suggested pride. He said pride in a slave was dangerous. I said nothing. This was the problem. There was no correct answer. Silence was insolence. Speech was backtalk. The game was designed so you always lost. He ordered me to step away from the pens into the open yard. I obeyed. My boots squelched in the mud. The morning sun was already hot. Sweat ran down my back under my shirt. Other slaves were working nearby, 2 women carrying water, 3 men repairing fence posts, a child feeding chickens. They kept their heads down, but I could feel their attention shifting toward us. They knew what was coming. We all knew the script by now. The overseer positioned himself so everyone could see. This was theater. Punishment was always theater, performed for an audience to reinforce lessons about power and place. He said I needed to understand my position. He said I needed to remember what I was. He said I should repeat after him. Then he spoke words meant to diminish me, descriptions of my worth, my nature, my purpose. He wanted me to say them aloud, to make the humiliation active rather than passive, to force me to participate in my own degradation. I complied. I spoke the words in the smallest voice I could manage, barely above a whisper, trying to minimize the moment, trying to make it pass quickly. This angered him. He said louder. He said I was mumbling. He said everyone needed to hear. I repeated the words louder, still not loud enough. He stepped closer. His face was red. Spit gathered at the corners of his mouth. He was working himself into something, building momentum, feeding on the audience and his own authority. He shoved me. I went down into the dirt, landing hard on my side. The impact drove air from my lungs. Dust filled my mouth. I lay there for a moment, gathering myself, listening. This was strategic. Staying down 1 extra breath sometimes satisfied them. Rising too quickly looked like defiance. I counted silently 1, 2, 3 before beginning to push myself up. Then the dogs started barking. Not the usual barking, the casual noise they made when people passed their pen or when food was coming. This was different, urgent, strained. The sound had edges in it. I paused, still on the ground, my hands flat in the dirt. The barking continued, coming from the far side of the yard near the tree line. Multiple dogs, their voices overlapping, building into something close to panic. The overseer stopped mid-sentence. He turned toward the sound, irritation crossing his face. He yelled for someone to quiet the dogs. No one moved. The barking intensified. I shifted my body slightly, angling so I could see toward the woods without lifting my head fully. This required care. Looking at the wrong thing at the wrong time drew attention. But something about the dog's reaction made me cautious. The overseer walked toward the dog pen, still yelling. The dogs did not quiet. If anything, they grew louder, more frantic. Other slaves had stopped working now. The women with water buckets stood frozen. The men at the fence had turned toward the commotion. Even the child with the chickens was staring. I rose slowly to a crouch, keeping low, keeping my attention split between the overseer and the woods. The dogs were visible now through the fence slats. 3 of them, all hunting dogs, all trained to track and corner. They were pressed against the far side of their pen, as close to the woods as they could get, barking toward something I could not see, but they were not advancing. They were not trying to jump the fence or dig under it. They were holding a line as if something invisible was keeping them back. I remembered a night from childhood. I was maybe 6 years old, still living with my mother before they sold her south. We had been tending the goat pen after dark when wolves appeared at the edge of the clearing. They did not attack. They just circled, staying beyond a certain distance, testing boundaries. My mother had whispered, "They know where they can go and where they can't. Some things answer to nobody." The memory rose sharp and clear. The same quality of held distance. The same invisible line. People in the yard were glancing toward the woods, then snapping their eyes back to safe targets, the ground, their tools, each other. Fear was showing on faces. Fear was dangerous to show. It suggested you saw something worth being afraid of. The overseer reached the dog pen. He grabbed the gate and shook it, yelling at the dogs to shut up. They ignored him. Their attention stayed fixed on the woods. He drew his pistol and fired once into the air. The shot cracked across the yard. Birds exploded from trees. The women with buckets dropped them. Water spilled across dirt. The dogs went silent for exactly 3 seconds, then resumed barking. The overseer's face darkened. He holstered the pistol and turned back toward the yard, toward me, redirecting his authority where it might work. He pointed at me and said this was not finished. He said I would regret making a spectacle. He said punishment would come later, after work, when there was proper time to handle it correctly. I nodded once, submission as armor. But I was watching the woods. Something moved at the tree line, not a dog. Not a person. Something larger, darker, moving with deliberate slowness. It stepped from shadow into the edge of morning light and held position. The overseer was still talking, still making threats, still trying to regain control of the moment. But his voice had changed. It was higher now, tighter, as if he sensed something had shifted in the yard's attention. I kept my face blank. I kept my breathing shallow. I looked at nothing directly while tracking everything in peripheral vision. The shape at the wood's edge became clearer, four-legged, heavy through the shoulders, head low and steady, eyes catching light. A Volf, but wrong somehow, too large, too still, too deliberate in how it held the boundary between forest and clearing. The overseer noticed where my attention had drifted. He turned toward the woods, following my gaze. He saw it. His attempt to laugh died in his throat. The sound came out strangled, broken in the middle. The yard contracted. It felt physically smaller, as if the presence at the tree line was taking up space that had belonged to us. Breathing became conscious. Movement stopped. I remained crouched in the dirt, hands open, body low. I did not rise. I did not retreat. I let the overseer move first. He took one step backward. The Volf stepped forward. Not rushing, not aggressive, just matching distance, maintaining relationship, claiming territory with the kind of certainty that does not require violence to prove itself. The dogs in the pen folded back against the far fence, whimpering now instead of barking. Their tails were down, their bodies pressed together for safety. The overseer's hand moved to his pistol. His fingers fumbled with the holster. He pulled the gun free, but the barrel wavered, tracing small circles in the air as his hand shook. The Volf held position. It was watching the overseer, eyes steady and patient. But there was something in its posture that suggested it was aware of everything: the slaves frozen in place, the dogs cowering, me crouched in the dirt. Then its gaze shifted, away from the overseer, past him, directly at me. I froze completely, not from fear exactly, though fear was present. From recognition of something I did not have words for. The Volf was looking at me the way a person looks at another person, seeing, assessing, acknowledging. Someone whispered the word, devil. Words spread like fire through dry grass. Devil, evil, demon, the language of explanation rising to fill the space where understanding failed. The overseer said my name. He said it like an accusation, like I was responsible for what stood at the tree line. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, making sure the connection was established in witnesses' minds. I answered with silence. Speech would have given him something to use against me later. Silence was slippery. It could not be quoted or twisted. The Wolf took another step forward. The overseer raised the pistol higher. He was trying to aim, but the shaking made it impossible. The barrel jerked left, right, up, down. Sweat ran down his face despite the morning coolness. The Wolf's posture shifted, shoulders forward, head higher. Not aggressive. There was no snarl, no bared teeth, but dominant, claiming space, drawing a line that said this far, no farther. The overseer retreated, 3 steps backward. He was trying to make it look controlled, like he was choosing to move, but his body told the truth. His legs were unsteady. His breathing was audible from where I crouched. I shifted my weight, angling toward the shed's shadow to my left, moving slowly, keeping low, trying to become smaller and less noticeable. The Wolf's head turned, not toward me, toward something beyond the yard, deeper in the woods. Its ears swiveled, tracking sound none of us could hear. Then it just stood there, occupying space, owning the silence, making everyone in the yard aware of how fragile our structures were, how quickly the agreed-upon order could dissolve when something outside the system appeared. The overseer's voice cracked when he finally spoke. He ordered everyone back to work. He said it multiple times, each repetition louder and less convincing than the last. No one moved. He fired the pistol again, not at the Wolf, into the ground halfway between us. Dirt exploded upward. The sound echoed off the barn walls. The Wolf did not flinch. This was the moment I understood. Whatever stood at the tree line was not afraid of guns or men or the structures that governed the plantation. It answered to different rules. It existed outside the hierarchy we all pretended was permanent. Slowly, deliberately, the Wolf began to withdraw. It stepped backward into shadow, its eyes never leaving the yard, its movement unhurried as a judgment being delivered. It disappeared into the woods. The yard exhaled, then stiffened. The overseer's face went from pale to red. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked around at the slaves still frozen in place, at the witnesses to his fear, at the evidence of his shaking hands. He needed to reestablish control. Needed to rewrite what had just happened into something that fit the approved narrative. He pointed at me. He said it was a stray dog. He said anyone who claimed otherwise was spreading witch talk. He said witch talk was punishable by whipping. He said I had better not open my mouth about what we had just seen. I stayed silent. He walked around the yard, stopping in front of different slaves, demanding they confirm it was a dog. Just a stray dog? Nothing more? Nothing strange? Nothing worth discussing? Heads nodded, not because anyone believed him. Because agreement was survival. He came back to me. He crouched down so his face was level with mine. He said my name again, this time quietly, like a threat delivered in private. He said I had caused this somehow. He said my presence had attracted the animal. He said I would be punished, not just for earlier insolence, but for whatever dark thing I had brought to his yard. He stood and announced my punishment would come at sundown after work, when there was time to handle it properly. Then he ordered everyone back to their tasks. I rose slowly from the dirt. My legs were stiff from crouching. My hands were still caked with mud from the hog pen. I returned to my work as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The rest of the day passed in heavy silence. We worked under watchful eyes that refused to meet mine directly. The other slaves kept distance from me, as if proximity might transfer whatever suspicion now attached to my name. I kept my pace steady. I moved with the same rhythm as always. I gave them nothing new to notice, but inside I was memorizing every detail. The Wolf's size, its coloring, the way it moved, the way it looked at me, the invisible line it drew in the dirt between their world and something older. Evening came with the promise of pain. In the quarters after work, whispers started, then died when footsteps passed outside. People wanted to talk about what they had seen, but fear made them careful. Speaking could mean being included in whatever punishment was coming for me. I sat on my bunk, alone, waiting. My back was tight with anticipation. I knew what was coming. I had been whipped before. The body remembers. The door opened when the light dropped low. 3 men came for me, the overseer and 2 others. They did not speak. They just gestured for me to follow. I followed. They took me to the barn. Inside, rope was already prepared. A post. Everything arranged. The overseer said I could make this easier. He said if I admitted I imagined the Wolf, if I said it was just a dog, and I was confused, he would go lighter on me. I said nothing. This was the trap. Admission would not save me. It would just give them ammunition for later. Proof that I saw things that were not there. Evidence of instability. Justification for future controls. He asked again, then again. I stayed silent. The punishment landed on my body with familiar precision. I had learned long ago how to leave myself during these moments. How to go somewhere inside where pain could not follow completely. When it finished, they left me on the barn floor. I lay there in the dark, tasting blood, feeling the fire across my back, knowing the official story would harden overnight. By morning, the Wolf would be nothing, a stray dog, a mass delusion, a story that never happened, but I would carry the truth forward, careful, intact, unshared for years, because I had seen something the system could not explain, and that made me dangerous. The scars healed crooked over the next 2 weeks. My wife, her name was Sarah, though I rarely spoke it aloud where others could hear, cleaned the wounds each night with water and torn cloth. She did not ask what happened. She had seen the Wolf too, from her position near the water barrels. She knew asking would only force me to choose between silence and lies. The official story settled into place like sediment in water. A stray dog, nothing more. Anyone who suggested otherwise faced punishment for spreading superstition. But the story spread anyway, in whispers after dark, in glances exchanged during work, in the careful way people positioned themselves when I was near, not too close, but not avoiding me obviously enough to draw attention. They wanted to believe the Wolf meant something, that it was a sign, that the system cracking open for one moment meant more cracks would follow. I gave them nothing to hold on to. When they asked quiet questions, I looked confused. When they referenced what we saw, I said I only saw a dog. When they pushed for more, I reminded them that witch talk was whipped out of people. This was survival. The overseer was watching me, waiting for me to claim the Wolf as mine, to take ownership of the moment, to give him justification for worse punishment. I would not give him that. 3 weeks after the incident, a slave from a neighboring plantation was caught running. They brought him back tied to a horse, his body torn from being dragged through brush. They hanged him from a tree at the property line as a warning. We were all required to watch. The overseer stood beside me during the hanging. He said nothing. He did not need to. His presence was the message. This is what happens when you believe in signs. This is what happens when you think something is coming to save you. The body hung for 3 days before they cut it down. After that, the whispers about the Wolf stopped. But I still thought about it. In the fields, in the quarters at night, in the moments between sleep and waking when memory feels more real than the present, I thought about the way it looked at me, the recognition in its eyes, the invisible line it drew. 2 months passed. Work continued its rhythm, planting, tending, harvesting. The plantation operated like a machine that required human fuel. We burned ourselves to keep it running. Then the overseer came for me again. This time it was different. He did not come with anger or accusation. He came with a buyer. They walked through the fields at midday, the overseer pointing out different slaves, describing their capabilities, their temperaments, their histories. The buyer was looking for workers to clear land in Alabama, hard labor, dangerous work, high mortality rate. They stopped in front of me. The overseer told the buyer I was strong but strange. He said I had a history of attracting trouble. He said I needed to be watched carefully. The buyer asked what kind of trouble. The overseer hesitated. Then he said I had claimed to see a Wolf where there was only a dog. He said I had encouraged superstitious talk among other slaves. He said I was a risk to good order. The buyer studied me for a long moment. Then he made an offer. The price was lower than it should have been. My size and strength should have commanded more, but the overseer accepted quickly. He wanted me gone. I was given 1 hour to prepare. Sarah and I walked to our cabin in silence. Inside we stood facing each other. She put her hand on my chest, over my heart. She did not cry. We had both known this was possible. Separation was always possible. She asked if I would remember her. I said yes. She asked if I believed the Wolf was real. I said yes. She said good. She said that meant something still existed outside their control, something that could not be bought or sold or beaten into submission. Then she kissed me and we walked outside. The buyer chained my wrists. I climbed into his wagon beside 2 other men who had been purchased that day. The overseer watched us leave, his face showing satisfaction barely contained. Sarah stood in the yard until distance made her invisible. The journey to Alabama took 9 days. We traveled through Georgia, the wagon moving slowly over bad roads. The buyer stopping at plantations where he had arrangements for overnight shelter. We were kept in barns or storage sheds, chained to posts, fed once a day. On the 5th day, one of the men in the wagon, his name was Thomas, asked me about the Wolf. I said it was a dog. He said he had heard different. He said word traveled between plantations through traders and visitors. He said my story had spread further than I knew. I said there was no story, just a dog. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, maybe, but men don't sell you cheap over a dog. I said nothing. The Alabama plantation was worse than anything I had experienced. 200 slaves working land that fought back dense forest, hard clay, roots like iron. We cleared with axes and fire, working from dawn past dark, sleeping in open-sided sheds that gave no protection from weather. Men died regularly, from accidents, from exhaustion, from infections that turned wounds black and septic. I survived through careful invisibility. I worked hard, but not so hard I stood out. I kept quiet, but not so quiet I seemed hostile. I made myself average in a place that consumed the exceptional. A year passed like this. Then one night I saw the Wolf again. I was alone, walking back from the latrine, when movement at the forest edge caught my eye. I stopped. The moon was 3/4 full, giving enough light to see shapes but not details. The Wolf stepped from the trees. It was larger than I remembered, or maybe distance and time had made my memory smaller. It stood 50 feet away, watching me with the same steady gaze I remembered from the plantation yard. I did not move. I barely breathed. The Wolf took 3 steps forward, then stopped. It tilted its head slightly, as if asking a question I did not know how to answer. I wanted to speak, to ask what it wanted, to ask if it followed me or if I followed it, to ask if Sarah was right, if it represented something outside their control. But I stayed silent. The Wolf held position for maybe 30 seconds. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood there long after it was gone, feeling something I had not felt in years. Not hope, exactly. Hope was dangerous, but possibility. The knowledge that the world contained things that did not fit into the ledgers and chains and ownership documents. I told no one about this encounter. The next morning, I worked the same as always. The day after, the same. I built a wall around the moment and kept it protected. But it changed how I carried myself. Not obviously. I did not stand taller or speak louder or challenge authority. I simply stopped collapsing inward. I stopped making myself smaller than I was. The overseers noticed. They could not articulate what was different. I still followed orders. I still worked hard. I still kept my eyes down when they approached. But something had shifted in my presence. Something they could feel but not name. It made them nervous. 3 months after seeing the Wolf the second time, I was sold again. This time to a plantation in Mississippi, another buyer, another chain, another journey. Sarah's question returned to me during that journey. Would I remember her? I realized I had been remembering wrong. I had been trying to remember her face, her voice, specific moments we shared. But memory was not about details. It was about carrying forward the fact that she existed, that we existed together, that for a time we built something real in a place designed to make love impossible. The Wolf was teaching me this, not through words, through presence, by appearing and disappearing, by existing outside explanation. I could not hold the Wolf in memory the way I tried to hold Sarah. It was too large for that, too strange. But I could carry forward the knowledge that it existed, that I saw it, that it saw me. This became my resistance, not running, not rebellion, not violence. Just refusing to forget what the system demanded I forget, refusing to accept their story as the only story. Years passed. I was sold 2 more times. I worked 5 different plantations. I survived by being unmemorable, by blending into the mass of bodies that powered the cotton economy. But I never saw the Wolf again. Sometimes I wondered if I had imagined it. If the first sighting was real, but the second was my mind creating what I needed to survive. If the whole thing was just exhaustion and fear and hope mixing into delusion. But then I would remember the dogs, the way they cowered, the way the overseer's hand shook, the way the yard contracted around that presence. You cannot imagine that kind of fear in other people. The war came when I was 43 years old. We heard about it in fragments, rumors, whispers, stories that seemed impossible but kept repeating. The North was fighting the South. The fight was about us. I did not let myself believe, but the plantation changed anyway. White men left to fight. Overseers disappeared. The owner's sons never came back. Control loosened like a rope fraying under tension. Some slaves ran, most stayed. Running required believing freedom was possible. Most of us had learned not to believe in things we could not see. Then Union soldiers arrived. They rode onto the plantation at dawn, maybe 60 men in blue uniforms, their horses tired, their faces hard. They told us we were free. The word hung in the air like smoke, free. No one moved. The captain asked if we understood. An old woman named Ruth spoke. She asked what free meant. The captain said we could go anywhere, do anything, work for wages, own property, choose our own lives. Ruth asked where we would go, what we would eat, how we would survive. The captain had no answer. This was the truth underneath freedom. Liberation without resources is just a different kind of cage. We had no money, no land, no tools, nothing except botas and the knowledge of how to work them to death. I left anyway. Not immediately. I stayed for 2 weeks, trying to decide what to do. Then I started walking north. I did not know where Sarah was. She could be dead. She could have been sold a dozen times. She could have married someone else, but I had to try to find her. I walked for 6 months. I asked at every plantation, every town, every settlement. I described her. I told our story. Some people tried to help. Most had their own missing people to find. I never found her. But during that journey, I saw the Wolf one final time. I was crossing through Tennessee, walking a road through dense forest when it appeared ahead of me. Standing in the middle of the path, blocking the way forward, I stopped. We looked at each other for a long time. The Wolf, the man. The distance between us measuring something I still did not understand. Then the Wolf stepped aside. It moved off the path into the trees, leaving the way clear. I understood then. Not with my mind, with something deeper. The Wolf was never about rescue or protection or signs from God. It was about witness. It appeared at moments when the system tried to erase me, when the overseer humiliated me in the yard, when I was sold away from everything I knew, when I needed to remember that something existed outside their ledgers and chains and ownership papers. The Wolf was not there to save me. It was there to be seen, to prove that the world contained mysteries they could not control. I walked past where it stood in the trees. I did not look back. I never saw it again. I am an old man now. I live in Ohio. I work as a carpenter. I built a small house with my own hands. I never found Sarah. I never married again. I spent 40 years looking for a face I will never see. People sometimes ask about my life before freedom. I tell them simple stories. Work, survival, the usual narrative of slavery that white people can hear without discomfort. I do not tell them about the Wolf, not because I think they would not believe me, but because the Wolf was mine, a truth I carried forward when the system tried to write me out of existence. The overseer wanted me to say it was a dog, to accept his story, to let my reality be replaced by his version of events. I never did. I carried the truth forward, careful, protected, unshared until now. Because this is what they could not take, my memory, my testimony, my refusal to forget what I saw. The system recorded everything, how much I cost, where I was sold, how many times I changed hands, but they never recorded the Wolf. They never recorded the moment when something outside their control appeared, in their carefully ordered world and made grown men shake. They never recorded that I saw it, that I remembered it, that I survived long enough to tell this story. So I'm telling it now, not because I think it will change anything. The system is gone. Slavery ended. The plantations are abandoned or turned into museums where white people learn sanitized versions of history, but the Wolf was real. And I was there, and that matters.